the colloquial definition of politics, as well as the popular notion of politics. If you ask people what is politics, a lot of people will say it's about ideology. But colloquially, we use the word politics in a way that is more true to its original etymology, in the Greek sense of the polis being a city-state. So when we talk about politics, we're talking about the internal workings as well as the external relations between different city-states, that is, in a Spenglerian sense, organisms, social organisms. So the colloquial definition, if we talk about workplace politics, politics in sports, politics in Hollywood, when we talk about the internal politics of a system, usually we're referring to gossiping, we're referring to the way in which people are acting nepotistically, we're talking about favoritism, we're talking about identity groups who are not looking out for the greatest efficiency, they're not basing things on merit, they're basing things on identity, who they like, who they don't like, nepos, meaning cousin. So that is the colloquial definition of politics, and if we were to speak about metapolitics, then we would be speaking about ideology, right? Because ideology doesn't necessarily care about your identity group. In a way, ideology and identity are opposites. If I'm an ideologue, then I don't care about your background or your race or your religion or any of these particularities. What I care about is, what do you think about the free market? What do you think about Marxism? What do you think about protectionism, open borders? What do you think about the Constitution? What do you think about monarchy? What do you think about fascism? What do you think about socialism? So the politics of the workplace, when we talk about workplace politics, we're talking about sociality, we're talking about identity, we're talking about nepos. We are not talking about ideology, we're not talking about abstraction. And yet, if you ask people, people don't have this colloquial definition in mind. They have a more popular definition. If you just ask, what is politics, devoid of any context, the workplace politics. If you say, what is politics? Often people say, well, politics is ideology. It's ideological. It's about left versus right. So this is an interesting contradiction in which essentially, depending on the context, politics means the entirely opposite thing. So when we talk about metapolitics, we really have to nail down what definition we're using. Because if we define politics ultimately as the nepotistic relations that define the internal workings of an organism or the external relations between social organisms, then politics is a social phenomenon. The phenomenon of politics is where different groups within an organism or different organisms in their external relations, they vie for power, they vie for control, they vie for favor. That is a pretty clear definition of politics that ultimately comes from the Greeks. But the new definition of politics that we have, which is based off the French Revolution, the left and the right, the left being those who are more liberal, those who are more erotically charged in favor of change, versus those who are conservative, and those who are conservative are more fearful of thanatos. So change is a singular thing. We can abstract the concept of change and say change is a thing which has both the positive benefit of being erotic and new. We love things that are new. We're obsessed with the newest fashion, the newest craze, the newest game. We're obsessed with that which is new. We don't care about that which is old. We care about the future. We care about that which is new. That's an evolutionary impulse at a very basic psychological level. But we also fear that which is new, because newness carries with it risk, and risk carries with it implicitly death. So even things which are new in the social sphere carry the stigma evolutionarily, instinctually, of death, because if we are socially ostracized from the group as a collective organism of human beings who can't survive on their own, implicitly social ostracization is equal to death in our instinctual history, in our Paleolithic history. Now, of course, today people can exist as curmudgeons and they can exist as individuals or whatever, and individualism is a growing part of our societal makeup here in the West, which is interesting because at the same time that individualism is increasing, you're also having increased liberalism, which is at the same time that the fascination with newness is increasing, there is a depression of the fear of ostracization. So those two things work hand in hand, basically. That as our fear of thanatos, whether it's social death or physical death, whatever, the fear of thanatos and change, the association there, that is depressed, and as a result, there's a corollary rise, yin-yang fashion, there's a rise like a seesaw of our erotic charge toward newness. So, this can be demonstrated in a number of ways. As you eliminate violence in society, in general, you're going to increase sexual liberation. This is the division between the bonobos and the chimpanzees being more violent, the bonobo being more orgiastic, prone to masturbation and orgies and sexual liberation in the animal kingdom. So this is a basic element of psychology that goes deeper than the human level. It goes to other species as well. The inclination, we can even see this in mice versus rats. Mice are more cautious, rats are more curious. So, or maybe I've got it the other way around, but there's a division there where one is more fearful of change and one is more interested in change. So it's a very, very deep instinct. It really goes back to the basic, almost a basic Pythagoreanism of attraction versus repulsion. Are you more attracted to change? Are you more repelled by change? And the balance there forms an evolutionary niche that a species fills, or a subspecies, or a group, or a culture fills that niche of being very resistant to change because you have a very good model of how to run your society or to run your group or whatever whether it's a meme or a gene or a system of memes or a system of genes. It's a self-reproducing system that works well because it doesn't change. It sticks to what's good. It doesn't fix what ain't broke. Whereas another system, which is Western civilization, Faustian civilization, is that system which is constantly erotically charged in favor of change, constantly seeking out that which is new. So the Indo-European expansion is really symptomatic of something that is just happening with life in general, expanding across the planet, but also humans in general expanding out of Africa. So all of these things, when we talk about Faustian civilization, its uniqueness is not that it is categorically unique, but that it is unique to a degree. It is unique to a degree in that the Faustian civilization is just the most erotically charged civilization, and I'm using that word erotically charged in a Freudian sense of eros thanatos. You're attracted to that which is new, you're scared of that which is new. So to be erotically charged means your attraction to that which is new outweighs your repulsion to that which is new. Everyone has this. Everyone gets disoriented by new things. Everyone's scared of change to a degree. But Faustian civilization is that civilization which embraces change, which is attracted to change, which is obsessively pursuing change in the same way that men pursue sex with women. And this has, in art, this has been portrayed a number of times as Daphne and Apollo. So Apollo is the scientist, and he's chasing Daphne as a representation of knowledge, of conquering nature. So that poem by Ovid in Roman times continues through Faustian civilization, but it's really only a relative difference. It's not an absolute difference. Beyond humanity, beyond mammals, whatever, this Freudian dichotomy between eros and thanatos, attraction to change, repulsion from change, it exists as a result of, just basic almost laws of logic and laws of life and reproducibility, emerges in this way. Very basic systems. There are very few systems that you can, computer programming is ones and zeros, one being yes, zero being no. Acceptance, refusal, chasing, running away, fight or flight, this sort of thing. So Faustian civilization is just that culture that developed within the Indo-European family, and the Indo-European family developed among the different cultures and linguistic groups of humanity, and humanity developed among all these apes, and apes developed among these mammals, and mammals developed ultimately among different animals, and animals developed among different forms of life and branched out from there. So this obsession with newness is not necessarily new as a category, but the extent to which it's been taken, we could say we've reached some sort of pinnacle. Now, whether it stops or returns to a form of conservatism is an argument that I continually have with people. I'm of the position that our obsession with newness is going to push us beyond humanity. And once something superior comes out that is better at being human than humans, so all of the things that humans do, we interact with technology, we farm, we gather resources, we do all these things, all the functions that put humans at a competitive advantage relative to other animals, all the things that we do. If there comes out some sort of artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence or genetically modified intelligence, some form of intelligence that's better at doing what we do than we are, then it's going to replace us. And when it does replace us, a lot of the obsession with newness that we have right now that is mostly internal, right? So transgenderism is not about going to Mars and discovering new planets. Transgenderism is about discovering a new identity within yourself. So it's this Nietzschean concept that when you don't have external obstacles or external goals, you start to view yourself as the obstacle. You start to view your own body as the obstacle, and you start this self-criticism. So rather than going out into the universe and conquering the stars, you're conquering yourself, and you're conquering yourself by deconstructing your own identity. So you say, well, I'm white, and that's evil, and I need to stop viewing myself as white, and I need to view myself as an evil racist, and undergo this very Christ-like self-sacrificial to a point where it's like self-hating, and then you transcend the concept of yourself, and you transcend, like a Jordan Peterson, you transcend the concept of collectivism, and you go to this like Stoic Epicurean Buddhist interpretation of reality. You transcend everything, you enter nirvana, you enter enlightenment. The problem with that is these people are still very concerned with earthly things, so they're not being very consistent in that sort of pursuit. But there is a kind of aesthetic germ there, this need to transcend beyond identity politics. Identity politics is the big enemy. That is the big no-no, that if you embrace identity politics, you are, if you're on the winning team, I guess, then you're bad. If you're a loser, if you're a victim, if you can claim victim status, then that makes it good to pursue identity politics. In a way, there is a kind of liberal white identity based around self-hatred, but it's a self-hatred exoterically, not necessarily the opposite being esoterically. So it is an extrinsic rather than intrinsic self-hatred. So it's a public self-flagellation, but intrinsically the white liberal views themselves as superior to the white conservative. The white conservative is ignorant. The white conservative is unenlightened. The white conservative is a brute. The white conservative is a racist and a sexist and a bigot and all these bad words. But the white liberal feels himself to be liberated from all these things. Even if he says, oh yes, I'm guilty of white supremacy, I have white privilege, he says all these things, he says the right words, and it's sort of like a magic spell. There's a paradoxical element to it. There is a in the same way that mystical ideas like everything is nothing and nothing is everything, like these oxymorons and tautologies that bend the laws of logic, or you try to, things like weakness is strength and strength is weakness, and if you're a strong man, then you're compensating for your low self-esteem, and if you're a feminist man, then that's really what it means to be a strong man, because you're not afraid. So all of these inversions and confusions they require a great deal of abstraction, because on their face they look like self-hatred, but I think internally, psychologically, these people who mouth liberal talking points are not actually self-hating people. I think they're people who have caught on to a game. They recognize the center of power, they recognize the reigning ideology, they attach themselves to it in order to gain social power, so that they can beat other people over the head with, hey, I'm superior to you because I'm willing to, abase my own identity, at least exoterically, but intrinsically, I think, and people have pointed out that certain groups will go around and say, as a white man, I think white men are terrible. And then, you see a post on Twitter and they're like, I don't know how far I can go with it. You guys kind of know where I'm going with this. But people will do that, so they'll extrinsically abase themselves, but intrinsically they have a secret nested identity. They're like, yeah, I look white, but secretly, and people think I'm just talking about Jews. I'm not just talking about Jews here. I think when a guy like Beto O'Rourke goes out and says, yeah, white people are terrible, even Joe Biden will go out there and say, white people are going to be a minority, and that's excellent. When these elite white people go out and they make these self-abasing statements, I don't think they do it because they have low self-esteem. I think they do it because there's a kind of duper's delight. There's almost a sadistic pleasure that they get from pretending that they're white, because to them, whiteness is a category like humanity. Like when someone goes out and you hear people be misanthropic, right? So a person will say, I'm a misanthrope, I hate everybody, humanity is terrible, we should all kill ourselves. It's like, well, let's start with you. No, everybody else is terrible, everyone else is a jerk, and I just see things for how they are. People are, and it sometimes is very deep, especially with nature lovers. People like, people, they abuse the environment, humanity should be wiped out. Well, let's start with you. Why don't you wipe out yourself? So often when someone says, I hate humanity, really what they're saying internally is, I'm better than the rest of you. I'm superior to the rest of you. So when you hear a white elite man say, white people are terrible, really what he means is other white people are terrible and I'm the superior white person. I'm above these rednecks. I'm above the racist. I'm above the Nazi. I'm above the conservative. And I'm able to abstract and tell these complex lies and fit in with the social paradigm, and I'm willing to attack the white working class and the white middle class, and I'm willing to exterminate these people so that I, the true white ruling class, that I can be pushed up the social ladder and get the social approval and all of those things. So there isn't a pause button on Mac. I'm going to ask you guys, teach me how to pause. I'm using, what is it? It's a photo booth. So teach me where the pause button is, because right now all I see is there is a square stop button. Every time I stop the video, that means I have to slice the clips together. I don't want to do that. So we're going to take a break. You can go listen to some Bach, and then we'll be back. All right. We're back, and I wanted to shift gears back to the discussion about politics and ideology. I don't know how we got so off track, but let's get back on track. So there are these two definitions of politics. If we define politics as the struggle for power among different in-groups, then metapolitics means ideology. Specifically, the classical liberal tradition that then spawned Marxism, socialism, capitalism, all of these ideologies, even fascism to an extent, come out of the classical liberal tradition, the concept of doctrine. I mean, you study National Socialism and attempts to say, oh, we're not an ideology, we're just about race, we're purely identitarian. But then they do have this doctrine, they do have these dogmas. And I would say the whole concept of politics as ideology really comes to fruition from the split between Catholics and Protestants over doctrine. Now, of course, the obsession over doctrine is an earlier thing that comes from Christianity. We could say that politics was invented by Christianity to a degree, because Christianity, at least in the West, invented this concept of doctrine. So previously, now we could even say Judaism invented politics. That's another step we could take. But in the Western world, there was no such thing as ideology, right? So you could worship Odin or Thor or Jupiter or Zeus or Apollo, or you could worship Athena, or there are many gods you could worship, and no one would say you're wrong to worship one god or another god. There was no question of, my God is morally superior, and therefore I should rule over you. It was merely about power. It was merely about following the traditions, being true to your lineage. So people would have disputes over who should rule, and these disputes would never go down to ideology or doctrine or something like that. It would always be who's got the power and who has the right lineage, who has the right bloodline. So really, the invention of politics, or the invention of ideology, we should say, was an invention of this concept of doctrine superseding sociality. That is, abstraction superseding sociality. That's not something we see before then. So yeah, I mean, Judaism with its monotheism is putting the supremacy of doctrine above sociality and power and tradition and things like that. It's putting this line in the sand saying there are these eternal laws, they don't evolve, there's no lineage, it's just this absolutism of doctrine. And that's where we get ideology from. And that's one way to define metapolitics is by saying, well, politics is really about ideology. To be metapolitical is to be identitarian. But in the Greek sense, really the root of the word politics means identity, so to be metapolitical means to be ideological. So in the Greek sense, the Jews were the first metapolitical group. In the Jewish sense, where politics is about ideology and doctrine, then the Jews were the first political group. So can go either way with it. And then, identitarian people would be metapolitical. Now, historically, which came first? Well, obviously, politics came before ideology, or identity came before ideology. So we would say that really, at the end of the day, if we want to be historically accurate and evolutionarily accurate and cognitively accurate, we have to understand that politics comes first. Ideology comes later. First, you love your family and you listen to your parents and you love your culture and you love your in-group, and that's how you get your abstractions and ideologies. Ideologies come second. Now, they might become so powerful and so fetishistic that you are so erotically charged in them that you come to hate your own in-group, you come to hate your own background. Certainly possible, we see that happening, but I think at the end of the day, identity is primary. Now, we could go further into a discussion about this, the applications, the results or the consequences of everything I've laid out, but that's pretty much, I just wanted to get down that semantic confusion about what is politics. Is politics about identity or is it about ideology? Because in different contexts it means the opposite of itself. It's a very problematic word, and therefore metapolitics is just more problematic. We really have to break down politics into its components of ideology and identity. We have to understand that Western civilization is unique among all civilizations, that it is uniquely ideological. That comes from Christianity, that comes from the split between Catholics and Protestants and develops outward from there. Faustian civilization is the most ideological civilization which has ever existed. It basically invented ideology, taking that Jewish model. I mean, the Jews always have their identity as Jews. So that's something you can take away all the rules and regulations and books and Talmud and Torah and everything like that. You strip that all away, there still is a Jewish identity. That is primary. Western civilization, Faustian civilization, has gone further than the Jews. It has taken the concept of ideology and doctrine and fetishized it to the point where it has gone beyond the concept of identity. Faustian civilization is the most anti-identitarian civilization which has ever existed. Not to say that there isn't a component of identity, lineage, bloodline, nepos in Western civilization, Faustian civilization, but we trace this back to the Indo-Europeans. They were uniquely meritocratic, uniquely anti-nepotistic compared to all other cultural groups. And the Faustian civilization within the Indo-European pantheon, we might say, or the family group, has taken that to another level. And then within that, you have the Catholic-Protestant split, where the Catholics were more traditional, the Protestants were more ideological, and the Protestants took that even another step. So they then developed capitalism and socialism, and communism came out of that. And you can say, oh, well, it was the Jews, it was the Jews. Certainly Jews are important here. We're not ignoring them, we're not discounting them, we're not pretending they don't exist. But Jews are operating within an Indo-European context. They're operating within a Faustian context. So they are merely looking at a trend. They're looking at a force. They're looking at a telos that is being pushed forward, and they're riding that telos and trying to direct it in a direction that they would like. But they're not inventing the impulse. They're not inventing the telos. The fact is that Indo-Europeans and Faustians and especially Northern Europeans have this erotic charge for newness and change, and they're the least conservative cultural group that the world has ever seen, which is funny because in modern discourse people talk about Europeans and white people are right-wingers and people of color are left-wingers. And that's how it's pretended, or that's how it's presented, but it's really the opposite, is that white people are the most revolutionary group on the face of the planet. They're the most left-wing, they're the most liberal, they're the most open to change. And everyone else, by comparison, is more conservative. So I've gone through these points before and when I tried to deconstruct the left versus right, but the more fundamental thing here to discuss is just ideology versus identity. And when we talk about identity, we're talking about nepotism. When we talk about ideology, we're talking about some form of meritocracy. Every ideology seems to push toward that in its own way. Communism tries to destroy parasitism from the ruling class. Libertarianism tries to destroy parasitism from the lower class and from the government. There are various forms of meritocratic impulse that influence these ideologies, of pointing out some scapegoats, some people who don't carry their own weight, some people who are not earning their power, not earning through merit, and then attacking those people, whoever they are. So that's what ideologies do, and we might say that there is an ideological component to the Indo-European concept of meritocracy, of putting power and ability above nepotistic kinship ties, right? So the ability to see past familial ties and to evaluate individuals objectively for their skill set and to integrate them into your group and to have a social organism, a hierarchy organized around ability rather than ties of kinship. That's a revolutionary concept that starts dramatically with the Indo-Europeans and then is developed within further subsets of Faustian civilization and then later Germanic Northern European civilization. These are developments that happen over time. People ask me, well, if Northern Europeans are so superior, which is not what I'm saying, by the way. I'm saying that they're extremely erotically charged toward newness and change and expansion and what we refer to as Faustianism, versus Southern Europeans who are more conservative, more traditional, less abstract, less ideological, more nepotistic. So I create this distinction and people say, well, if this is true, why wasn't Northern Europe building colosseums? Why was it so technologically backward? Well, first of all, when you look at the archaeological record, the first human bows and arrows are found in Germany. Okay, we have megalithic structures in Britain like Stonehenge. We have evidence of early technological development about 10,000 years ago in Northern Europe that you just don't see in other sites. Now, that could be just because the archaeologists in Northern Europe are better. We're finding new stuff all the time. We're finding new data all the time that is contradicting. I mean, there was just evidence of Homo sapiens presence in Greece 2,000 years ago, or 200,000 years ago, I should say, which contradicts the narrative that humans left Africa 80,000 years ago and arrived in Europe 40,000 years ago. We've just blown that number away that I've been using for a long time. We've blown it away by a factor of 3, 140,000 years. I mean, that's a big deal. So this is stuff we're discovering this year. We're going to discover more next year. So these narratives are all going to have to be rewritten. But what I'm saying is that there was an Indo-European expansion that was clearly had a Faustian spirit to that. Within that, Spengler then categorized different subsets. You know, obviously, Hinduism is a derivative of the Indo-European family, but it didn't take this Faustian expansion to the next level in the same way that Western Europe eventually did after the fall. I mean, Roman Empire, you could say, well, it had this world-conquering spirit. Then the Roman Empire falls, and then you have the Germans and the Vikings, and they're expanding into Russia, and they go into North Africa and Spain and Italy, and they set up all these Germanic kingships, and they assimilate. And so, you know, all of the kings of Italy are descended from German invaders. All the kings of Spain and Bulgaria and Russia, they're all descended from Germanic or Viking invaders. And they change their names to make themselves blend in with the native culture. The Normans start speaking French, but they're Northern Europeans. The Anglo-Saxons become the English. And the Norwegians, I mean, the Battle of Hastings, that whole time period is about who's going to rule over the British Isles. It's not going to be the Celts. That's, spoiler alert, it's not going to be the Celts. It's either going to be the Norwegians, the Normans, or the Anglo-Saxons. So it's really 3 Germanic tribes fighting over supremacy of these Celtic peoples, ultimately. And even the Celtic invasion of Britain, I mean, did the Celts come in and just wipe out the pre-Celtic peoples? No. They came in, much as the Magyars came in, and they simply changed the language from the top down. They didn't exterminate everybody. And the Jews make the same, oh, we went into Canaan, we exterminated everybody. Well, you know, Moses married an Ethiopian woman, so I don't buy that. I don't buy that the Jews went in and exterminated everybody. I think they went in and they converted people. And they had the Kohanim. Clearly the Kohanim are a caste within Judaism which sees itself above and has separate origins, the same way the Brahmin have separate origins from the rest of Indian society. So, I don't know, ideology and identity, if we view the world through this lens, through this dichotomy, we see that the development of doctrine and ideology is something that we get from the Indo-Europeans, ultimately. And it's something we see in ancient Egypt, the development of religious doctrine. It's something we see in ancient Judaism, right? And then we see it's something that then is transmuted through into Christianity. It then explodes with the Protestant-Catholic divide. It then, through its descendants of classical liberalism, becomes capitalism, socialism, communism, atheism, humanism, all of these isms, these ideologies. This is something that there's a funneling process. Maybe we should make the funnel like this, so that at the top you have like the Indo-Europeans and associated influenced cultures. So Indo-Europeans 6,000 years ago, influencing the Jews in the Middle East, influencing the Egyptians, influencing all these people. Maybe there was some kind of pre-Indo-European culture. People want to talk about Atlantis. I don't have any evidence for that, but you want to have some kind of unitary field theory of culture, human culture, that there was somehow some kind of originary culture that influenced the Egyptian and the Sumerian and the Babylonian and the Jewish and the Indo-European that preceded all of them. I think that's not necessary. It's almost a conspiracy at that point, because you're saying, and not to put it down, but this is just the way that, I don't know, this is the way the narrative is, that you have one narrative where there was some kind of superculture of Übermensch that gave the rest of humanity culture, which we find in ancient texts. We find that in ancient religions all the time, this concept that some higher being came down and gave us culture. But then there's also this concept of emergent evolution and psychology and convergent evolution, where you just have this predilection for newness, and that takes precedence over the fear of death, and that develops into ultimately abstraction and ideology in early religious forms that supersedes the concept of being pure, supersedes the concept of being powerful. The concept of being pure and right and good supersedes the concept of being, and this is like the divide Nietzsche found between like aristocracy in terms of bloodline and maybe ability and power, the difference between that and what he calls slave morality, which is this appeal to purity, that even if we're not strong, we're at least good. So this is something that develops in early religion. It develops through all of these different cultural systems, and it really is synthesized through Christianity. It really does come out with the Protestant-Catholic divide and all of the ideology that's produced from there. This is a uniquely Western thing. So when people talk about Western identitarianism or European identitarianism, it's almost a contradiction in terms, because the unique thing about the West, the unique thing about Europeans, is that in comparison to all other cultural groups, they are uniquely anti-identitarian. They are uniquely ideological. And you have some people who are like pagans, who are anti-ideological, who want to turn back the clock, but in that way they're in a way anti-European, because they want to defy that thing which has defined Europeans for hundreds, if not thousands of years in comparison to other groups. You want to defy their most unique characteristic, and you want to call yourself pro-European, which is really ironic. In a sense, the most pro-European people are the most anti-racist people, the people furthest on the left. I mean, if you think about it, the left, the ideology is the home, or how do I say this? The left has a home field advantage in ideology, because ideology is an invention of the left. The right wing is eternal. The right wing is perennial. The right wing has always existed. The right wing is just conservative. Doesn't want to change. The left wing invented ideology. Therefore, if we're talking about an ideological combat, ideological contest between left and right, the left is always going to win, because it has the home field advantage, because the left wing invented the concept of ideology. This is why the right wing always loses, because we're saying which ideology is better. Well, probably the ideology that came up with the concept of ideology. That's probably going to be the one that's going to win the contest of ideology. It's like, all right, so I'm the guy, I invented a sport called tube ball. I don't know. What's the sport going to be called? Sport is going to be called formalist ball. I don't know. What's the catchphrase? Brown ball. And there's got to be a better name. There's got to be a better fake sport. But I invent a sport, Ken ball. I invent this sport and I say, let's play a game. You say, okay, are we playing just for fun? I say, no, we're going to play, and whoever wins gets to take over the government. And you say, what are the rules? And it's like, don't worry, let's just play a game. Let's just see how it goes. It's like, you're probably going to win, aren't you? Because you invented the game. The left invented the concept of ideology. So the left is always going to win ideological struggles. This is so basic, something that people don't really understand. They think, right-wing people just need to be more ideological than the left, and then we'll win. Teleologically, the concept of ideology lends itself to the supremacy of the left, because the left originated the concept, and you can never get around that. So you either have to become left-wing and embrace that, or you have to just totally throw ideology out the window, which is what formalism does. So those are kind of the two choices that you have there. I think that's all for today. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.